just joshing A.S.M.R. Hey everybody, we only got a couple more chapters left, and then we're done with this beautiful book, Holes, unfortunately. But where we are right now is Stanley and Zero just got caught by the warden, and all the other counselors, where they're at that hole where Stanley found Kissin Barlow's lipstick tube, and they just pulled out of like a treasure chest, and all of a sudden all these yellow spotted lizards start swarming Stanley and Zero. They must have dug up a nest or somewhat when they were digging the treasure or whatever. So that's where we left off. And let's see how it progresses, see what goes on. Chapter 46. 500 seconds later, his heart was still beating. Mr. Pendanski screamed. The lizard, which had been in the cereal box, was springing toward him. Mr. Sir shot it in midair. Stanley felt the blast shatter the air around him. The lizard scurried frantically across his very still body. He did not flinch. A lizard ran across his closed mouth. See, this didn't happen in the movie. They talked about shooting them, the lizards, while they were in the hole, but they were like, that'll make them scatter, their movements unpredictable, and they didn't know what would happen, so they didn't do that. The only time Mr. Sir actually did shoot one of them was in it wasn't in the book at all. When Stanley was taking a shower after one of his new days, when he was just around camp, just getting started. When he was taking a shower, and a yellow spotted lizard was near Stanley when he came out of the shower, and Mr. Sir shot it midair when it was going to strike Stanley. So that's the only time that ever happened. So it's funny how they switch things around, you know. He glanced at Zero, and Zero's eyes met his. Somehow they were both still alive, at least for one more second, one more heartbeat. Mr. Sir lit a cigarette. I thought you quit, said one of the other counselors. Yeah, well, sometimes sunflower seeds just don't cut it. He took a long drag on his cigarette. I'm going to have nightmares the rest of my life. Maybe we should just shoot them, suggested Mr. Pendanski. Who? Asked the counselor. The lizards or the kids? Mr. Pendanski laughed grimly. The kids are going to die anyway, he laughed again. At least we got plenty of graves to choose from. We've got time, said the warden. I've waited this long, I can't wait another few. Her voice trailed off. Stanley felt a lizard crawl in and out of his pocket. We're going to keep our story simple, said the warden. The woman's going to ask a lot of questions. The AG will most likely initiate an investigation. So this is what happened. Stanley tried to run away in the night, fell in a hole, and the lizards got him. That's it. We're not even going to give them Zero's body. Zero doesn't exist, like Mom said. We got plenty of graves to choose from. Why would he run away if he knew he was getting released today? Asked Mr. Pendanski. Who knows? He's crazy. That was why we couldn't release him yesterday. He was delirious. And we had to keep watch over him so he wouldn't hurt himself or anybody else. She's not going to like it, said Mr. Pendanski. She's not going to like anything we tell her, said the warden. She stared at Zero and at the suitcase. Why aren't you dead yet? She asked. Stanley only half listened to the talk of the counselors. He didn't know who that woman was or what AG meant. He didn't even realize they were initials. It sounded like one word, AG. His mind was focused on the tiny claws that moved up and down his skin and through his hair. He tried to think about other things. He didn't want to die with his images of the warden, Mr. Sir, and the lizards etched into his brain. Instead, he tried to see his mother's face. His brain took him back to the time when he was very little, all bundled up in a snowsuit. He and his mother were walking hand in hand, mitten in mitten, when they both slipped on some ice and fell and rolled down a snow-covered hillside. They ended up at the bottom of the hill. He remembered he almost cried, but instead he laughed, and his mother laughed too. He could feel the same light-hearted feeling he felt then, dizzy from rolling down the hill. He felt the sharp coldness of the snow against his ear. He could see flecks of snow on his mother's bright and cheery face. This was where he wanted to be when he died. Hey, caveman, guess what? Said Mr. Sir. You're innocent, after all. I thought you'd like to know that. Your lawyer came to get you yesterday. Too bad you weren't here. The words meant nothing to Stanley, who was still in the snow. He and his mother climbed back up the hill and rolled down again, this time on purpose. Later they had chocolate with lots of melted marshmallows. It's getting close to 4:30, said Mr. Pendanski. They'll be waking up. The warden told the counselors to return to the tents. She told them to give the campers breakfast and to make sure they didn't talk to anyone. As long as they did as they were told, they wouldn't have to dig any more holes. If they talked, they would be severely punished. How should we say they will be punished? One of the counselors asked. Let them use their imagination, said the warden. Stanley watched the counselors return to the tents, leaving only the warden and Mr. Sir behind. He knew the warden didn't care whether the campers dug any more holes or not. She found what she was looking for. He glanced at Zero. A lizard was perched on his shoulder. Zero remained perfectly still, except for his right hand, which slowly formed into a fist. Then he raised his thumb, giving Stanley the thumbs-up sign. Stanley thought back to what Mr. Sir had said to him earlier, and the bits of conversation he'd overheard. He He tried to make sense out of it. Mr. Sir had said something about a lawyer. But Stanley knew his parents couldn't afford a lawyer. His legs were sore from remaining rigid for so long. Standing still was more strenuous than walking. He slowly allowed himself to lean against the side of the hole. The lizards didn't seem to mind. Chapter 47. The sun was up, and Stanley's heart was still beating. There were 8 lizards in the hole with him. Each one had exactly 11 yellow spots. The warden had dark circles under her eyes from the lack of sleep and lines across her forehead and face which seemed exaggerated in the stark morning light. Her skin looked blotchy. "Satan," said Zero. Stanley looked at him, unsure if Zero had even spoken or if he just imagined it. "Why don't you go see if you can take the suitcase from Zero?" the warden suggested. "Yeah, right," said Mr. Sir. "The lizards obviously aren't hungry," said the warden. "Then you go get the suitcase," said Mr. Sir. They waited. "Satanly," said Zero. Sometime later, Stanley saw a tarantula crawl across the dirt. Not too far from his hole, he had never seen a tarantula before, but there was no doubt what it was. He was momentarily fascinated by it, as its big, hairy body moved slowly and steadily along. "Look, a tarantula," said Mr. Sir, also fascinated. "I've never seen one," said the warden, "except in..." Stanley suddenly felt a sharp sting on the side of his neck. The lizard hadn't bitten him, however, it was merely pushing off. It leapt off Stanley's neck and pounced on the tarantula. The last Stanley saw of it was one hairy leg sticking out of the lizard's mouth. "Not hungry, huh?" said Mr. Sir. Stanley tried to return to the snow, but it was harder to get there when the sun was up. As the sun rose, the lizards moved lower in the hole, keeping mainly in the shade. They were no longer on his head and shoulders, but moved down to his stomach, legs, and feet. He didn't even see any lizards on Zero, but believed there were 2 between Zero's knees, shaded from the sun by the suitcase. "How are you doing?" Stanley asked quietly. He didn't whisper, but his voice was dry and raspy. "My legs are numb," said Zero. "I'm going to try and climb out of the hole," Stanley said. As he tried to pull himself up using just his arms, he felt a claw dig into his ankle. He gently eased himself back down. "Is your last name your first name spelled backwards?" Zero asked. Stanley stared at him in amazement. Had he been working on that all night? He heard the sound of approaching cars. Mr. Sir and Warden heard it as well. "You think it's them?" asked the warden. "Ain't the Girl Scouts selling cookies?" said Mr. Sir. He heard the cars come to a stop and the doors open and shut. A little while later, he saw Mr. Bendesky and 2 strangers coming across the lake. One was a tall man in a business suit and cowboy hat. The other was a short woman holding a briefcase. The woman had to take 3 steps for every 2 taken by the man. "Stanley Yonets," she called, moving out ahead of the others. "I suggest you don't come any closer," said Mr. Sir. "Can't stop me," she snapped, then took a second glance at him, wearing pajama pants and nothing else. "We'll get you out of here, Stanley," she said. "Don't you worry." She appeared to be Hispanic, with straight black hair and dark eyes. She spoke with a little bit of a Mexican accent, trilling her R's. What in tarnation? The tall man exclaimed as he came up behind her. She turned on him. I'm telling you right now, if any harm comes to them, we will be filing charges not only against Miss Walker in Camp Green Lake, but the entire state of Texas as well. Child abuse, false imprisonment, torture. The man was more than a head taller than she and was able to look directly over her as he spoke to the warden. How long have they been in there? All night, as you can see by the way we're dressed. They snuck into my cabin while I was asleep and stole my suitcase. I chased after them, and they ran out here and fell in the lizard's nest. I don't know what they were thinking. That's not true, Stanley said. Stanley, as your attorney, I advise you not to say anything, said the woman, until you and I have had a chance to talk in private. Stanley wondered why the warden lied about the suitcase. He wondered who it legally belonged to. That was one thing he wanted to ask the lawyer, if she really was his lawyer. It's a miracle they're still alive, said the tall man. Yes, it is, Morton agreed, with just a trace of disappointment in her voice. They better come out of this alive, Stanley's lawyer warned. This wouldn't have happened if you'd released him to me yesterday. This wouldn't have happened if he wasn't a thief, said the warden. I told him he would be set free today, and I guess he decided that he'd try to take some of the valuables with him. He's been delirious for the last week. Why didn't you release him when she came to you yesterday? The tall man asked. Shouldn't have proper authorization, said the warden. I had a court order. It was not authenticated, the warden said. Authenticated? It was signed by the judge who sentenced him. I need authentication from the attorney general, said the warden. How do I know it's legitimate? The boys in my custody have proven themselves dangerous to society. Am I supposed to just turn them loose anytime someone hands me a piece of paper? Yes, said the warden, if it's a court order. Stanley has been hospitalized for the last few days, the warden explained. He's been suffering from hallucinations and delirium, ranting and raving. He was in no condition to leave. The fact he was trying to steal from me on the day before he released proves. Stanley tried to climb out of his hole, using mostly his arms so not to disturb the lizards too much. As he pulled himself upward, the lizards moved downward, keeping out of the sun's direct rays. He swung his legs up and over, and the last of the lizards hopped off. Thank God, exclaimed the warden. She started toward him, then stopped. A lizard crawled out of his pocket and down his leg. Stanley was overcome by a rush of dizziness and almost fell over. He steadied himself, then reached down, took hold of Zero's arm, and helped him slowly to his feet. Zero stole out the suitcase. The lizards, which had been hiding under it, scurried quickly into the hole. Stanley and Zero staggered away. The warden rushed to them. She hugged Zero. Thank God you're alive, she said, as she tried to take the suitcase from him. He jerked it free. It belongs to Stanley, he said. Don't cause any more trouble, the warden warned. You stole it from my cabin, and you've been caught red-handed. If I press charges, Stanley might have to return to prison. Now I'm willing, in the view of all the circumstances, to. It's got his name on it, said Zero. Stanley's lawyer pushed past the tall man to have a look. See? Zero showed her. Stanley Nets. Stanley looked too. There, in big black letters, was Stanley Nets. The tall man looked over the heads of the others at the name on the suitcase. You say he stole it from your cabin? The warden stared at it in disbelief. That's She couldn't even say it. Chapter 48. They slowly walked back to camp. The tall man was the Texas Attorney General, the chief law enforcement officer for the state. Stanley's lawyer was named Mrs. Marengo. Stanley held the suitcase. He was so tired, he couldn't think straight. He felt as if he was walking in a dream, not quite able to comprehend what was going on around him. They stopped in front of the camp office. Mr. Sir went inside to get Stanley's belongings. The Attorney General told Mr. Bandansky to get the boys something to drink and eat. The warden seemed as dazed as Stanley. "You can't even read," she said to Zero. Zero said nothing. Miss Marengo put a hand on Stanley's shoulder and told him to hang in there. He would be seeing his parents soon. She was shorter than Stanley, but somehow gave the appearance of being tall. Mr. Bandansky returned with 2 cartons of orange juice and 2 bagels. Stanley drank the juice but didn't feel like eating anything. "Wait," the warden exclaimed. "I didn't say they stole the suitcase. It's his suitcase, obviously, but he put my things from the cabin inside of it." "That isn't what you said earlier," said Miss Marengo. "That's what's in the suitcase," the warden asked Stanley. "Tell us what's in it, then we'll open it and see." Stanley didn't know what to do. "Stanley, as your lawyer, I advise you not to open your suitcase," said Miss Marengo. "He has to open it," said the warden. "I have the right to check the personal property of any of my detainees. How do I know there ain't drugs or weapons in there? He stole a car, too. I've got witnesses. He was clearly hysterical." "He is no longer under your jurisdiction," said Stanley's lawyer. "He has not been officially released," said the warden. "Open the suitcase, Stanley." "Do not open it," said Stanley's lawyer. Stanley did nothing. Mr. Sachar returned from the office with Stanley's backpack and clothes. The Attorney General handed Miss Marengo a sheet of paper. "You're free to go," he said to Stanley. "I know you're anxious to get out of here, so you can just keep the orange suit as a souvenir, or burn it, whatever you want. Good luck, Stanley." He reached out his hand to shake, but Miss Marengo hurried Stanley away. "Come on, Stanley," she said. "We have a lot to talk about." Stanley stopped and turned to look at Zero. He couldn't just leave him here. Zero gave him a thumbs up. "I can't leave Hector," Stanley said. "I suggest we go," said the lawyer with a sense of urgency in her voice. "I'll be okay," said Zero, his eyes shifting toward Mr. Bandansky on the one side of him, then to the warden and Mr. Sir on the other. "There's nothing I can do for your friend," said Miss Marengo. "You are released pursuant to an order from the judge." "They'll kill him," said Stanley. "Your friend is not in danger," said the Attorney General. "There's going to be an investigation into everything that's happened here. For the present, I'm taking charge of the camp." "Come on, Stanley," said the lawyer. "Your parents are waiting." Stanley stayed where he was. His lawyer sighed. "May I have a look at Hector's file?" she asked. "Certainly," said the Attorney General. "Miss Walker, go get Hector's file." She looked at him blankly. "Well..." stared at her. "Get it," she ordered. Mr. Bandesky went into the office. He returned a few minutes later and announced the file was apparently misplaced. The Attorney General was outraged. "What kind of camp are you running here, Miss Walker?" The warden said nothing. She turned at the suitcase as she stared at the suitcase. The Attorney General assured Stanley's lawyer that he would get the records. "Excuse me while I call my office." He turned back to the warden. "I assume the phone works." He walked into the camp office, slamming the door behind him. A little while later, he reappeared and told the warden he wanted to talk to her. She cursed, then went inside. Stanley gave Zero a thumbs up. "Caveman, is that you?" He turned to see Armpit and Squid coming out of the rec room. Squid shouted back into the rec room, "Caveman and Zero are out here." Soon all the boys from Group D had gathered around him and Zero. "Good to see you, man," Armpit said, shaking his hand. "We thought you were buzzard food." "Stanley is being released today," said Mr. Banansky. "Way to go," said Magnet, hitting him on the shoulder. "And he didn't even have to step on a rattlesnake," said Squid. Even Zigzag shook Stanley's hand. "Sorry about, It's cool," said Stanley. "We had to lift the truck clear out of the hole," Zigzag told him. "It took everybody in C, D, and E. We just picked it right up. It was really cool," said Twitch. X-Ray was the only one who didn't come over. Stanley saw him hang back behind the others a moment, then returned to the rec room. "Guess what?" said Magnet, glancing at Mr. Banansky. "Mom says we don't have to dig any more holes." "That's great," Stanley said. "Will you do me a favor?" asked Squid. "I guess." Stanley agreed, somewhat hesitantly. I want you to. He turned to Miss Moringa. "Hey, lady, you have a pen and paper I can borrow?" She gave it to him, and Squid wrote down the phone number, which he gave to Stanley. "Call my mom for me, okay? Tell her I said I was sorry. Tell her Alan said he was sorry." Stanley promised he would. "Now you be careful out in the real world," said Armpit. "Not everybody is as nice as us." Stanley smiled. The boys departed when the warden came out of the office. The Attorney General was right behind her. "My office is having some difficulty locating Hector Cerrone's records," the Attorney General said. "So you have no claim of authority over him?" asked Miss Moringa. "I didn't say that. He's in the computer. We just can't access his records. It's like they're falling through a hole into cyberspace." "A hole in cyberspace," Miss Moringa repeated. "How interesting. When is his release date?" "I don't know." "How long has it been here?" "Like I said, we can't." "So what are you planning to do with him? Keep him confined indefinitely without justification?" "Why do you go crawling through black holes in cyberspace?" The Attorney General stared at her. "He was obviously incarcerated for a reason." "Oh, and what reason was that?" The Attorney General said nothing. Stanley's lawyer took hold of Zero's hand. "Come on, Hector. You're coming with us." Chapter 49. I want to get one thing clear. Squid never asked Stanley to call his mom and tell him he was sorry. That was Armpit. That pisses me off that they changed that. And where else? "Now you be careful out in the real world. Not everyone is as nice as us." They were saying it. Armpit said that. X-Ray said it. I don't know why they do that. I just keep picturing it in my head on the movie or whatever. That's just the way it has to be for me. I mean, I can't read that and be like, yeah, that's right. I can't. But yeah, it's annoying. Why'd they do that? Why? Why'd they change it? I don't get it. But, like I said, we're on chapter 49, and we got 2 chapters left. Got exactly 10 pages left. So the next one will be the last one. Hope you tune in. Thanks for listening.